environmentally, just very briefly, the problem with animal agriculture is that it is absurdly inefficient. And we are growing massive amounts of grain, corn and soy primarily. Over half of all the land in agriculture in the United States, for example, is just for two crops, corn and soy, that are not used for human beings, hardly at all. I mean, 90 to 95% are going to animals. And so this inefficiency translates into environmental devastation. These are, monocropped fields of genetically engineered corn and soy. We lived, my wife and I, in an RV for 17 years, traveling North America. Basically, North America has been reduced, unfortunately, to these monocropped fields where nothing is allowed to live. It's an absolute war against nature. Any birds or animals that try to live there, any other plants besides corn and soy, you kill them, right? We have herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, everything to just kill everything. So just one thing lives. That's the opposite of nature. Nature wants some kind of celebration of life happening, right? No. It's a war against nature of unmitigated scale. And so, and then all the toxic runoff of all this stuff ends up in the water, killing fishes and again, birds and butterflies and bees and everything else. We have the largest dead zone, we have like 25 dead zones in the oceans at this point worldwide. The largest one in the entire world is at the base of the Mississippi River. And so it's called nutrient-rich runoff. All the chemical fertilizers run in there and cause hypoxia, which is basically the loss of oxygen, so nothing can live. So we have these dead zones, and we have this actual behavior of animal agriculture that just requires a vast killing machine. Unfortunately, that's the basic thing. If you're going to be eating 75 million animals every day for food, then it's going to require a system that's just huge. And so this system reaches its tentacles everywhere. It reaches into our entire, the fields and forests and valleys and so forth on the land, into the heart of the rainforest, into the oceans, into basically everywhere. And everything it touches, it's damaging. And I think we have to really understand that, because we don't see that. We think it all seems so benign, right? We go outside here, we leave, and we see these ads for pizza and cheese or McDonald's, different burgers and so forth. And the sense is that this is all very benign. This is what we're supposed to do, that we're good people, we like good food, and this is what we like, ice cream and eggs and all these things. We don't see that environmentally this is enormously devastating because it's so inefficient. It requires so much grain to feed these animals, and that it's also causing the devastation of the oceans and of the rainforest. And just briefly, we're overfishing the oceans to the point where oceanographers are really concerned about the collapse of the ocean ecosystems. The large fish have been basically taken, and so we have a situation essentially where the demand for fish is so vast, because we're not just feeding fish to human beings. Scientists discovered a long time ago that it's profitable if you enrich the feed that is given to cows and pigs and chickens. So they're given fish meal. And so in the United States, for example, most people don't realize it, but cows actually eat more fish than human beings do. Even though it seems kind of absurd to see a cow jumping into a stream trying to catch a fish, but they're eating huge amounts of fish. So it makes them give more milk and makes them fatten up faster, so it's profitable. And so we have these systems in place that are cutting down forests to grow grain, overfishing the oceans, to take the fish, taking all the fish out, basically, because we have such powerful fishing technology today, and also cutting down rainforests at a completely unsustainable rate. Right now, I just checked recently, it's the latest estimates are about, I think it's 80,000 acres a day, which is basically an acre per second. So, of rainforests is being cut down. So this is driving another thing, which is the mass extinction of species. We're losing, biologists aren't sure exactly, about 150 to 200 species every single day are going extinct. Again, caused by one thing, which is animal agriculture. The rainforests in the Amazon are being cut down in order to grow soy, primarily to feed to factory farm pigs, cows, chickens, and fishes. Factory farm fish eat a lot of soy. So underlying all of that, though, is this one behavior. This is why I want to emphasize at the beginning that when we take out our wallets, this is how we vote in our society. I don't know if the other votes are counted, but I know these votes actually get counted. And so when we take out our wallets and we vote and we pay for meat, dairy products, or eggs, we're telling the system to go ahead and cut down rainforests, take fish out of the ocean, grow corn and soy, and take huge amounts of inputs of water and petroleum and so forth to get basically not very much food for that. So according to the United Nations, for example, we have a ratio of 30, they said 32 to 1, and they're very conservative in their estimates. In other words, in terms of fresh water use. So in other words, 32 people eating a plant-based diet use as much fresh water as one person eating the standard Western diet. And fresh water is becoming a huge issue. I mean, we're living now in California, and it's a huge issue, and people don't talk about it. I mean, Jerry Brown is telling everyone that we have to really reduce our water footprint. We have to conserve water. And what he doesn't say, what people don't say, what the media doesn't say, is that household use of water in California is 4% of the water. 4%, right? And so, 80% is for animal agriculture, or for agriculture, and about 50% of that is for animal agriculture. And so it takes huge amounts of water to irrigate alfalfa and other crops, and to feed to cows for dairy. It takes 1,000 gallons of water, fresh water, to make 1 gallon of milk, for example. So we're talking about massive wasting, but it's invisible. See, that's the whole point of this conference, I think, and really of understanding, is that the mass media, as well as the corporations, financial institutions, the governmental institutions, really would rather we're not aware of the ramifications of all these things, because there's a huge amount of money that accrues to the system the way it's going to a tiny elite. And so it's very important for us, I think, that if we want to understand what's going on here, to do our own research. So the bottom line is that environmentally, the greatest gift we can possibly give to the world is to move toward a more plant-based diet. I mean, I would say to a completely plant-based diet, because in terms of fresh water use, petroleum use, land use, pollution, we just shrink our environmental footprint radically when we move to a plant-based diet. It just makes it, we could feed everyone. They say right now, I mean, the research is unequivocal on this. I mean, there's really no debate. I mean, scientists say if everyone on planet Earth ate the way Americans eat, it would take at least another, probably 2 more Earths, for the land and the water and the petroleum. We in the United States eat way too much animal foods, so to be sustainable. So that's the environmental part. Animal agriculture is by far the greatest violence that we engage in as human beings against the earth. There's nothing that comes closer. Global climate change, again, being driven primarily by methane and nitrous oxide, which are 70 times and 200 times, respectively, more powerful as greenhouse gases than carbon dioxide, cutting down rainforests, overfishing the oceans. All these things are devastating to the climate stability. And so virtually every environmental problem is linked to animal agriculture. The other thing, too, I have to mention here is the fact that animal agriculture is a war on wildlife. And when you look at, for example, Whole Foods and other companies that are now sort of making a lot of money on grass-fed and free-range meat and dairy, you have to realize that comes at a huge price, because animals that are in factory farms, right? They're stuck in these sheds where no coyote's ever going to get in there, right? I mean, I can't even, if I try to go in there, I'll go to jail, I mean, these places are really locked up. But now you have, instead of 100% of the meat and dairy coming from those kind of places, now it's maybe 98%, right? I mean, a few percentage less, so we have 1 or 2 or 3% now, or food is coming from free range, or again, we have these ideas that they're sort of out there. These animals basically are typically very often in electrified fences. And so since we had in the last 10 years or so an increase in this in demand, people want something that they can think in their mind is less violent and abusive and maybe less unsustainable, we've seen a corresponding increase in the war against wildlife, because now we have in the USDA, Department of Wildlife Services, which we pay for with our taxes, the wholesale slaughter of millions of wild animals who are now seen as a threat to animal agriculture. And this is the way it's always been. So coyotes and bobcats and mountain lions and bears and even animals like horses and raccoons and otters and skunks and opossums and starlings and geese and ducks. I mean, all these animals are killed. You can just go to their website and see millions of animals. So when we're eating meat and dairy, we have to realize we're causing not just the death of the animals we're eating, their actual physical death, we're causing the complete unraveling of ecosystems. We're sending into extinction species. It's a war against wildlife. It is the worst, by far the biggest war against nature that we human beings engage in, and it's invisible. It's not talked about. There's no big headlines in the New York Times saying, 75 million animals died yesterday. What happened? It's like business as usual. We just voted for it. That's why, because we the people voted for it. So we have to realize that if we're voting for it, then we have the power not to vote for it, and we can also spread this message to other people and help other people become aware of this. So the cultural devastation of animal agriculture essentially has to do with what I've been talking about, the fact that we have hunger. We have worldwide hunger and starvation and malnutrition, which is devastating to world peace. There's a basic understanding in peace studies, which is that we can never have peace without justice. But again, animal agriculture is inherently unjust because those who are wealthy take much more resources, and those who are less wealthy starve. So right now we have about 7.2 or 3 billion people on the planet, and roughly, according to estimates, we don't know exactly, but around 1 billion, some estimates are as high as 2 billion, of our brothers and sisters are chronically hungry and starving. And yet every single year, we grow plenty of food. We grow enough food. Estimates range somewhere around enough food to feed 12 billion people. So we're growing enough food to feed 12 billion people. We only have 7 billion people. Why do we have 1 billion people starving? Well, I've already explained the situation. Basically, most of the grain, the corn, the soy, and other grains that could feed people, instead of feeding people, we're feeding them to cows, pigs, and chickens, and they are very inefficient. They create massive amounts of four things. They convert this into four things, right? They convert plant foods into saturated fat, cholesterol, acidifying animal protein, and huge amounts of sewage, which is unregulated in massive quantities. 130 times more animal sewage than human sewage in the United States, and it's basically unregulated. So this is the situation, and so what it basically boils down to is the fact that people who are born into less industrialized nations on this planet have relatively low earning, right? They don't have high-powered economies. And so it becomes impossible for them to purchase any food, because people in high-powered economies, like in the United States and other countries, when we have more industrialized nations, it's not difficult for us to drive up the price of grain on the world market to a point where we feed it to our cows and pigs and chickens and factory farm fishes, and we eat their flesh and secretions, no problem. But now we've driven up the price of grain too high, so the people in less industrialized nations cannot afford it anymore. And as the price goes up, we also are increasingly forcing them off the land through policies by the IMF and the World Bank and large financial institutions and corporations, and so they're forced into starvation. But the driving force behind it, essentially, of war is this inequity where you have some mothers and fathers seeing their kids starving in their arms, and people not far away just eating so high off the hog that we take most of the land, most of the grain, create most of the pollution, eat most of the fat. We eat all that. And of course the irony underneath everything is that while these people are suffering from diseases of malnutrition and hunger, the people in the more industrialized nations are suffering from diseases of excess, right? Where the hospitals are filled with people who are there because of diabetes and obesity and osteoporosis and liver disease and kidney disease and heart disease and breast, prostate, and colon cancer and autoimmune diseases and the whole litany of diseases. Also things like Alzheimer's and many of the mental problems that we see. All of these are linked to animal-based diets. I mean, they're linked very clearly to diets that are high in these foods. And so we see certain industries getting very wealthy on this whole thing, right? We have the large pharmaceutical industries, the large medical industries, the large agribusiness industries, and so forth, getting very wealthy. But and of course the defense industry, the weapons manufacturers get very rich because we have these chronic wars going on that caused by inequity. And so we have to understand that underlying all of this is this wonderful good news, which is that if we human beings on this planet would wake up out of the cultural trance of eating animal foods, which is injected into us from the time we're little infants by every institution in our society, by our families, by the media, by the government, by education and religion, every institution in our society essentially injects this into us. So I understand it's difficult to awaken out of that, but if we could, there's nothing stopping us really from creating a society of peace and justice and freedom and equality and sustainability, because this planet is enormously abundant. We're growing every year we're growing enough food to feed twice as many people as we even have here. We could feed everyone on a fraction of the land. I mean, look at that beautiful. We have technologies that can feed people in very small spaces with lots of food. So this is enormously good news. We can feed everyone on a fraction of the land. We can allow the rivers to come back and the forests to come back and the oceans to come back and our cultural health to come back and our inner sense of being part of a benevolent universe to come back. Because when we're raised in a society based on abuse of other living beings at a massive scale and pretending everything's okay, we are raised in a society where we're not playing with a full deck. I mean, we're essentially pretending, we're constantly pretending that these other beings don't matter. Yet how many people have companion animals like dogs or cats? You know, more and more we do, right? We have lots. So we know that these beings have interests, that they don't like it if we lock them in the closet and if we, make them live in their own excrement and if we didn't feed them. And, they suffered like we would suffer. And yet we do this to billions of animals and pretend that there's no consequences. There are massive consequences. And yet by covering that up, we become blind to it. So the whole idea is essentially to understand that animal agriculture is traumatic. It's traumatic to the animals who are traumatized from birth and to death. I mean, their lives are just filled with horrible trauma. We're eating trauma. And they're traumatic to wildlife. They're traumatic to ecosystems. They're traumatic to starving and hungry people. And it's also traumatic to the workers. We have to understand also that we have a whole army of people in our society and in societies who, that's their job, right? To work in factory farms, slaughterhouses, and so forth. And they do work that brings out the worst in them. That's what they do. They have to stab animals all day, or they have to electroshock them. They have to rape them on rape wrecks. They have to hit them. They have to hurt them. Because these animals have always resisted. They've always resisted from the very beginning of animal agriculture. They don't just say, "Oh, yeah, I'm born, to serve the superior humans." They're afraid, and so they're kicked. And they're moaning and bellowing for their babies and so forth. It's an enormous abuse that's going on. And so these workers who are also our brothers and sisters here, the workers that I take out my wallet, I'm paying someone to do something that's going to bring out the worst in them. These people have the highest rates of worker-related injuries, the highest rates of drug addiction and alcoholism, the highest rates of spousal abuse, of child abuse. They go back into their communities very often in the neighborhoods and their families and do terrible things to themselves or to other people because they've been traumatized, and when people are traumatized, they spread trauma, and those people get traumatized. And so we're creating, animal agriculture basically is a web of trauma that just radiates out into our society on every level, on the cultural level, on the environmental level, and on the physical health level. It's violence. It's what it is. And so the whole idea essentially is to begin to realize that we've been born into this. This system was already going. It's been going for 8,000 or 10,000 years, and we're born into that. And we can awaken out of that and begin to live our lives in alignment with our values so that we're not paying people to do abusive things, and we're not giving the products of that abuse to our children or to ourselves. We're seeing it for what it is. And the beauty, I think, when we understand that is we begin to see that we can be far more healthy and far more happy and far more radiant, really, in our lives and just in general if we move to a plant-based diet. I mean, I did this 35 years ago, and 40 years ago, in 75, I stopped eating meat. And then 5 years after that, 1980, I became a vegan. And I think, it's just an enormously positive thing to make an effort to understand and to bring our lives into alignment with, because even though it's difficult in our society, because every institution in our society in many ways, and all of our friends and family typically think that going vegan is some kind of an extreme radical thing that where are you going to get your protein kind of a thing. But actually, we begin to realize that it works. It really works. So that brings me to the third aspect of this, which is physical health. And again, this actually in the World Peace Diet, there's a chapter called The Intelligence of Human Physiology, which just kind of goes into this whole subject. It's a huge subject, and I think tomorrow I'll try to get into this a little bit more too. But the basic idea is that if you just look at our physiology, look at the physiology of a human being, it becomes very clear very quickly that we're not designed to eat meat. Right? We don't have the dentition. We're definitely not designed to eat dairy. I mean, eating dairy is really one of the worst things we can do, because we're not little calves that have the enzyme renin to break down casein, the main protein in milk. And so the whole litany of problems that kids have, the colic and the runny noses and the tonsillitis and the appendicitis and the earaches and everything else, and later on the acne, it's dairy. I mean, it's just a boon to the medical industry and the pharmaceutical industry if you have people eating foods that they're absolutely not designed for. But we're not designed to eating meat either. You can see very clearly looking at our dentition. We have small teeth. We have a flat face. We have very soft teeth that would just break if we tried to bite through hides or bones and things. We have saliva that only does one thing, essentially breaks down complex carbohydrates. We have a digestive tract that has weak hydrochloric acid that just does not do a very good job of breaking down meat fibers. We have a very long intestinal tract that is absolutely the worst thing if you're eating meat and dairy. We have a circulatory system that does not tolerate saturated fat very well. So, I mean, it's just idiotic. I mean, we can eat it. Like cows. Cows are eating huge amounts of fish and meat. They feed cows everything. They feed cows dogs and cats and pigs and chickens and fishes. That's standard procedure. But they don't do it because it's in the interest of the cows. They do it because it's in the interest of the exploiters of the cows that they eat this, right? And essentially it's the same for us. I mean, we're not eating this stuff because it's in our interest. We are eating it because we've been told to eat it. And that's a very important point to remember, that when we go out of here and we leave, and we talk to people, we see people who are eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, and so forth, there's only one reason anyone engages in that behavior, and that is because we're following orders. I followed those orders for 22 years. I just didn't question. I couldn't question it. This is what we do. We just do what we're told. We eat what we're told. It's injected very powerfully from very early on. But once we begin to understand that we're just following orders that are not in our best interest at all, and not in the best interest of animals or future generations or hungry people or slaughterhouse workers or anyone, except perhaps a tiny wealthy elite that gets wealthy on war and poverty and sickness and environmental devastation, then we begin to see that we can have a benevolent transformation of our society, and that there's nothing stopping us from that. It's available now, and I think we begin to see that we live in a critical time where it's essential that we actually do this, that there's no greater gift we can give to the world than to make an effort to understand what's going on, what's actually on our plate, what are the ramifications of meat, dairy products, and eggs. And we begin to see that it's enormous. It is by far the biggest thing we're doing on this planet, is our food. So, and its impact on the ecosystems and on our society and our physical health. The basic idea with the physical health is, like I said, we're not designed to eat animal foods. We can do it. Our body is a wonderfully magical, miraculous creation, it'll just do the best it can with whatever we put into us, right? I mean, right. So it'll, our body will probably say, when we eat a typical, standard American meal, oh, golly, I hope you don't do that again, but all right, I'll do my best I can with it here, our body does the best it can with whatever it is, and eventually, we end up, like I was talking to somebody at the break, that, all their friends are on medication of some kind or another, So the whole idea is to understand that we have this wonderful gift, but the basic idea really underlying that is that we've all been given this gift by the benevolent universe of a physical body that does not require any animal to suffer to get all the nutrients we need to be healthy. That's a great gift. And yet, all of us have been born in a culture where we've been forced from the time we're little infants to take that gift we've been given from the benevolent universe and just throw it right back into her or his face and say, well, we're going to stab and kill animals anyway and eat their flesh. And when we do that, we sow seeds of the exact opposite of what we would really want to experience in our lives of joy and freedom and abundance and prosperity and awareness and sustainability and all these things, which are totally available to us. Have you noticed, I mean, being here is somewhat artificial, but just even going outside, but just in general, how beautiful planet Earth is. Let's have a hand for the beauty of planet Earth. This planet is enormously beautiful and enormously abundant, and can feed us and can take care. We can live here in harmony with our friends, the animals, and with each other. The problem is animal agriculture as a actual practice, which is devastating on the outer level, but I'd like to talk about now also about animal agriculture as what it does to us internally, what it does to us in terms of our consciousness. Because the thing is, it would be one thing if animal agriculture was so devastating, but we really had all of our wisdom and intelligence and we could just solve the problems. But what animal agriculture does is it shuts down our intelligence as well. And so there we are, we're creating all this devastation and we can't figure it out. We just can't figure out why we're having these problems. We just don't get it. Because our intelligence is so suppressed by eating animal agriculture. It doesn't matter how many Ph.D.s you have. Your intelligence is suppressed by eating animal foods because it's basically about learning to disconnect. Animal agriculture, the fundamental thing. So this is it. So when we sit down at the table and we're eating typical meals of meat, dairy products, and eggs, there's an underlying program going on. And we're being injected with a certain set of attitudes and a certain mentality, a certain way of seeing, the world, again, that reduces our capacities. And when you have that happening for an entire society from the time everyone is born, then you have a society where you can see what the result is, where people pretty much do what they're told. We don't question the official stories from the government. We just believe and go along. And so what we're talking about is awakening out of that fog and that suppression of our natural capacities, because intelligence basically is the ability to make connections that are relevant for any system, right? So as a human being, my intelligence is my capacity to make connections that are relevant for me. For a society, social intelligence is the same thing. For a dog, for any living system, any living system has intelligence. That's what it uses to interact and to connect with and to be part of the larger wholes in which it is embedded and to further the unfoldment of life here on this planet. So we see these multiple levels of systems, and so as human beings, we have an inherent intelligence, and the intelligence is based on the capacity to take in and respond to feedback. So what we realize, though, is that when we're eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, we just learn to shut down the feedback. We just don't think about what the consequences of our actions are. If someone comes along and says they're a vegan, most people go, let's change the subject. I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to think about that. We just don't want to hear about it. We'd rather not think about it. So we just shut down. And so if someone says, well, would you like to know the ramifications of your food choices? Oh, no, I don't want. I want to enjoy my bacon. I don't want to hear about it. Just let me enjoy my bacon. Everything will be fine. So this mentality of disconnectedness is injected into all of us from the time we're little kids. And we become masters of the others. An old saying, actually, in German, Übung macht den Meister. Practice makes the master. Whatever we practice, we get good at, right? So if we're practicing every meal 3 times a day is a ritual of practicing the art of disconnecting, right? We just disconnect the food that's on our plate from the reality that it took to get it onto our plate. We don't think about the animals or the pollution or the violence or the abuse or any of that. We just eat bacon, right? We don't want to think about where it comes from. So that is a reduction of our capacities to make connections. At a very deep level, if someone were sitting around at the table for breakfast, for example, and eating bacon and toast and juice or whatever it is, and someone was eating their bacon, it would be very unusual for them to say to their friends and family around the table, "This bacon's pretty good. I wonder what she was like." What? What do you mean she was like? That's not a she, that's an it. Get out of here. There's this whole feeling of breaking a huge taboo just to say that, right? You just don't go there. You just don't talk. And yet, think how insane that is. There's this great saying by Krishnamurti. He said, "It is not a good idea to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society." It's not a good idea to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that's, I think, what we're seeing. At breakfast, if someone was to say that, it would be, in a sense, it's a taboo because we're not supposed to make those connections. We're not supposed to see the being for what the being is, and yet food is our most intimate connection with our society, with nature. When you're eating, think of that. What I'm eating becomes the very physical cells that we use to live our lives, right? What you're looking at right now is apples and kale and rice, talking to you, right? So this basic act of eating is something that you would think is so important and so essential and so intimate that we would really want to be aware, right? We want to be super aware of what we're eating. And yet when we talk to people, we find out they don't want to be aware about that. What is it? What is it about that? It's very interesting. So anyway, it's a mentality of disconnectedness is injected into us with every meal. Also a mentality of reductionism. We have a reductionistic science and a reductionistic religion. I talk about this quite a bit in the World Peace Diet. Maybe tomorrow I'll get into that more. But the basic idea is we reduce. Every meal essentially is reducing beings to things. It's a practice where we practice the art of looking with a certain way of seeing, with certain beings. When we see a being, we say, no, that's a thing. A cow, pig, chicken, fish, that is a thing. It's not a being, it's just a thing. So we practice commodifying life. And so when we become good at that, we practice that, we become good and we can commodify whole forests and say, well, that's just board feet of lumber, and we can commodify other human beings and say, well, they're just here for me to hire or use or whatever. So we begin to we reduce everything. See, this is the thing. It's a mentality of reductionism where we reduce beings to things. And one of the things I realized in doing the research that I did on the World Peace Diet is that whatever we do to animals, sooner or later we do to ourselves as well. And we find we more and more live in a society where we're reduced to being consumers, and we have to put a mask on and sell ourselves on a market, and we're reduced to a thing. So the whole idea is that for us to live lives of joy and freedom and creativity and so forth, we are called to honor other living beings and let them live their lives and see beings when we see beings. So what veganism is essentially is just simply seeing beings when we see beings. It's nothing to be proud of. It's no great thing. It's just basically returning to our true nature and coming home to our own heart and making connections and looking deeply and listening deeply and feeling deeply and questioning official stories and seeing beings when we see beings rather than seeing things when we see beings. And when we do that, we find our natural sense of self-worth and self-esteem, our natural sense of self-respect, our natural sense of joy at the opportunity of another day to be on this beautiful planet and to do something to help the world, where that begins to spring in our heart again, we begin to realize that our life does matter, that we do make an enormous difference every single day, and that we're here to find our unique way to bless the world, that we each do have gifts that we can bring to the world, and we're here to find them and share them, and the more we do that, the more we encourage other people to do that, and we can create a field, essentially, of awakening. And that what this whole conference is, essentially, it's a field of awakening. It's a field of questioning the official stories, of looking more deeply, and of seeing as much as we can the bigger picture that's hidden from us systematically by every institution in our society. So it's also, every meal is also essentially a ritualized injection into us of a mentality of privilege and elitism. The subtext of every meal is that certain beings are inherently superior. Other beings are inherently inferior. And it's totally fine for the inherently superior beings to dominate and exploit and use and abuse, however they want, the inherently inferior beings. So every meal is injecting us with this mentality of elitism and entitlement. And we wonder why sociologists, for example, say that one of the worst, most serious problems in our society today, and it's obvious to us, is the radical inequality. How some people have so much wealth they don't know what to do with all this money, right? Except buy elections, right? And other people have, huge amounts of people don't have enough money to even get enough to eat or have a place to live. And yet we tolerate that. And yet every single meal, if we're eating meat, dairy products, and eggs, is injecting us with this mentality of entitlement, of domination, of might makes right, of privilege, of elitism, because every meal is, we're not just talking about it, we're eating it. Think of it, we're not just talking about, we're actually eating this. It's becoming the cells of our being. So it's very important for us, again, to see and understand the power of food and move in our lives more towards meals of equality, of celebration, grow our own food, have it be sustainable, have it be organic, have it be simple. I think, the best food really is, number one, of course, plant-based. Number two, organic. Pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, all that stuff is terrible. Of course, non-GMO. Also, as much as possible, something that is unprocessed. Because processing really, in most cases, is reducing the value of the food, and it's also adding colors and flavors and preservatives of various kinds and packaging and all that stuff. So minimize that as much as possible, fresh and local as much as possible. If we live in that way, and we can, I think more and more, all of us, it's less expensive, and it's the foundation for a life and for a society that's based on a foundation of sustainability and freedom and justice and radiant health. It's definitely possible. Each one of us can make an effort to understand how to do this. And as we do that and we create context to educate each other and to do that like we're doing here, then we create the possibility of a future for our children, and a future, a positive future that is beckoning to us, that we, I think, need to see ourselves being called toward.